The flight attendant hadn't even smiled when she said it, just a flat, practiced tone. "Mechanical issue. Flight canceled. Please return to the gate for rebooking." I didn't bother. I called a cab, kept my suitcase at my side, and told myself I'd try again tomorrow. Seattle could wait. It was nearly dusk when I got home. The porch light was on. Strange. I hadn't set the timer. My stomach tightened, but I told myself not to overreact. Maybe I'd left it on in a rush. Maybe Florence had done me a favor. But when I stepped inside, the air felt disturbed, warmer than it should have been, and the hallway light was on. I'd turned everything off. I moved quietly. Not out of fear, but something else, something colder. A sound stopped me halfway down the hall. Low voices, a whisper, then the unmistakable clink of metal against metal. I rounded the corner and saw them. Grant was crouched low, focused. Carly held a flashlight over the brass knob of my bedroom door. A thin rod was wedged into the lock, its edges scratched raw. Neither of them looked surprised. "You weren't supposed to be back yet," Grant said, barely glancing at me. Behind them, I saw what they had already done. Boxes stacked in the hallway, my handwriting on the tabs, files, a wooden chest, the bottom drawer from my desk, pulled out half-emptied. I didn't speak. I didn't ask. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and tapped the screen. The recording light blinked. Carly straightened. "We thought we'd organize some things for you." Grant didn't even bother pretending. The bedroom had always been mine. The one room I'd never opened to anyone, not even when Grant moved back after the layoff. I'd locked it before I left, certain it would be safe, certain they had no reason to enter. And yet, there they were on their knees, undoing what little I'd thought was still protected. I stepped back toward the kitchen and opened the cabinet drawer where I kept the alarm logs. Carly started speaking first. "We were just trying to help, Helena. You've mentioned wanting to declutter. We thought while you were gone it might be a good time." I didn't answer her. I walked past them into the study and took in the damage. The drawers were pulled open at awkward angles, papers half hanging out. The safe, one I hadn't opened in over a year, was ajar, the keypad smudged. Inside, folders had been rifled through, the contents clearly disturbed. A small velvet pouch was missing from the corner. I took a breath through my nose. My hands stayed by my sides. "You signed off on this," Grant said behind me. "Last year after your hip surgery, don't you remember?" His tone was light, almost casual. I turned to look at him. There was no guilt in his face, just calculation. A practiced calm. I did remember. The papers had come from the hospital's admin office. I'd been drowsy and uncomfortable. They'd asked who should act on my behalf if I couldn't answer. I'd written his name. Temporary power of attorney for emergencies. "This isn't an emergency," I said quietly. "Well, no," he admitted. "But since you've been away and you said you were thinking of downsizing—" "I never said that," I replied. "You said the house was too much," Carly interjected, as if that justified everything. That morning, I'd left for what I thought would be a simple trip. A long weekend to Seattle, just to visit my sister and walk a little slower. But this hadn't started that morning. It wasn't the boxes that told me, or the open safe. It was the confidence, the comfort in their movements, like they'd done it all before. I reached for the study door and closed it slowly, locking it again from the inside. Then I crossed the hall and opened the coat closet. My spare set of documents was exactly where I'd left them, and the jewelry box beside them was gone. The alarm panel by the front door was dark. I tapped the screen. No response. I opened the control app on my phone and scrolled through the activity log. Disabled. Not turned off. Not glitched. Manually disabled. 3 weeks ago. Then again 2 days later. Then again and again. Dozens of entries. Every few days. I stared at the list until the dates blurred. They'd been coming and going freely, confidently, like it was theirs. I walked to the sink and ran cold water over my wrists, just long enough to feel something sharp. Then I grabbed my keys and walked across the lawn. Florence opened her door before I even knocked. "I was wondering why you were back already," she said. I asked if she'd noticed anyone coming to the house while I was gone. Her eyes dropped. "Well, yes," she said. "I thought you knew. Grant's been around a lot. Carly, too, sometimes in the evenings. A few times I saw them carrying things to a car." My voice stayed level. "Did they bring anyone with them?" She looked uncomfortable. "One day, maybe a week ago, there was a white van in the driveway. Grant was out front talking to a man with a toolbox. I assumed it was maintenance. Did they go inside? She nodded. They all did. I didn't think anything of it. I thanked her, said I'd just been surprised, then turned back toward my house. Inside, I sat down on the bottom step of the staircase and stared at the blank spot on the wall where my husband's military shadow box used to hang. I hadn't packed it. I hadn't moved it. The door to the guest bedroom was cracked open. I stepped inside. The closet was empty. Not just cleared, wiped. I walked back to the kitchen, opened the drawer next to the sink, and found what I was looking for: the USB drive where the camera backups automatically uploaded every week. I plugged it into my laptop and let the timeline load. While it buffered, I pulled out the folder marked Legal Updated and laid it flat on the table. The box wasn't valuable to anyone but me. Scratched wood, a loose hinge, velvet lining faded with time, but I knew exactly where I'd left it. On the second shelf of the guest room closet, tucked behind a quilt. It had been there for decades. Now it was gone. I didn't ask immediately. I waited until dinner. Carly had ordered takeout and set the table like it was any other evening. She talked about how tired she was from sorting things. Grant barely looked up from his phone. When we finished eating, I stood at the sink and said without turning around, "Where's the small wooden box that was in the closet?" Silence. I turned. Grant met my eyes. His expression didn't change. "You mean the old one with the latch?" he said. "I sold it. Figured you wouldn't miss it." He said it like he'd thrown out a cracked mug, like it meant nothing. Inside that box had been my wedding ring. Too small for my fingers now, but never removed from that pouch. A folded letter Richard had written me the day before his last surgery, and a tiny, brittle four-leaf clover Grant had pressed into a napkin when he was 6, whispering, "For luck, Mommy." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask why. I turned off the faucet and walked to my room. The folder was already on my nightstand. Inside it, the revocation of the power of attorney I had signed after my last follow-up visit. I'd printed it, told myself I'd mail it after my trip. I hadn't gotten around to it. I reprinted it that night. This time, I dated it, signed it again, slid it into a stamped envelope, and placed it by the front door. I spent the rest of the evening watching camera footage in silence. Boxes being loaded, drawers opened, Carly holding up my blouses one by one, then tossing them aside. At 2 a.m., I paused the video and stared at the frame, Grant lifting the velvet pouch out of the jewelry box and sliding it into his jacket pocket. The footage didn't lie. The timestamps stretched back months. Grant's car in the driveway, on mornings I'd been out running errands. Carly carrying boxes to the trunk. A stranger with a toolbox entering behind them. I watched them open closets, move furniture, test the safe. They didn't rush. They knew exactly where to look. One recording showed them walking down the hall laughing. Another, Carly photographing a painting on the wall before taking it down. I downloaded every file, labeled each one by date, and copied the folder onto a flash drive. Then I placed it in a plain envelope and sealed it with tape. The next call was to my lawyer. His office line went to voicemail after hours, but his personal number didn't. "It's Helena," I said. "Something's happened. I'll bring documents first thing tomorrow." The locksmith answered on the second ring. "I need every lock changed," I told him. "Front, back, and study. Tonight, if possible." He promised to come by before midnight. By the time the locksmith arrived, I'd already gathered every spare key I could find. He changed the locks, left the new keys on the counter, and drove off without asking questions. The house was quiet again, but not peaceful. I could still see them everywhere. The fingerprints on the glass door, the faint scuff marks on the stairs. I sat at the kitchen table, the flash drive between my palms, and waited for morning light to reach the window. At 8:00 sharp, I called my lawyer's office again and asked for the earliest appointment available. By mid-morning, I was sitting across from Dennis Worth, the same attorney who had helped me settle Richard's estate after the funeral. He didn't ask many questions, just unlocked a drawer, pulled out a folder with my name, and opened to the page marked with a blue tab. "The trust was filed 4 weeks ago," he said. "Everything is secure. No title transfers can occur without your signature, and we included the no contest clause you requested." I nodded. I'd forgotten about that part. It had felt like overkill at the time. He slid another document across the desk. "This came in 3 days ago, a title inquiry from a local realtor. The request was vague, but I recognized your address immediately. It wasn't from you, obviously." I didn't need to ask who it was from. "They get anything?" I asked. Not even a call back, Dennis said, but I thought you should know. I handed him the envelope with the flash drive. This is for record, I said. Surveillance footage, the last 3 months. He accepted it without opening it, placed it in a folder, and locked the drawer again. I'll draft a cease and desist, he added. You'll have it by this afternoon. I thanked him, stood, and shook his hand. Back in the car, I sat for a long moment before starting the engine. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even tired. I just felt done, like something had closed quietly behind me. When I got home, the locks had already been changed. The house felt different, emptier, but safer. In the hallway, one of the moving boxes was still there, half-taped. I pulled off the top and found books from the study, still wrapped in bubble paper. I placed them back on the shelf one by one, letting the silence fill the space they left behind. Then I opened the hall closet and began listing everything they'd taken. I would need it for the next step. I didn't plan on arguing, just documenting. Every frame of video, every item missing, every hour accounted for. By the time I finished the list, the deputy had already arrived. They arrived late, as if stalling would change anything. Grant parked at the curb, arms folded, jaw tight. Carly stepped out of the passenger side with sunglasses on, even though the sky was overcast. The deputy stood by the walkway, hands loose at his sides, saying nothing. Most of the boxes were there. The desk lamp, the kitchen mixer, 2 photo albums that had belonged to my mother. Carly carried them with exaggerated care, placing each one just inside the door like she expected applause. But I noticed what wasn't returned. The framed portrait from the study was missing. So was the silver necklace I'd last seen in the upstairs bathroom drawer. One of the antique side tables had been dropped, legs splintered at the joint and held together with tape. I didn't ask about any of it. I simply checked each item off the printed list in my hand, noting damages with a pen. Every time they brought in something, I nodded to the deputy and wrote a number in the margin. They kept glancing at him, waiting for him to interrupt. He didn't. Carly was the first to break. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You're treating us like criminals." I looked up steady. "You acted like ones." Grant shifted his weight, said nothing. He knew better than to argue. When the last item was in, I handed them a sealed envelope. "What's this?" Grant asked. "Restitution agreement," I said. "Itemized, signed and notarized. You have 90 days to settle it. I've already filed a copy with the court." Carly opened the envelope and skimmed the first page, her face flushing. She opened her mouth again, but Grant stopped her with a hand on her arm. They left without saying goodbye. I watched them go from the living room window, the curtain barely lifted. The car paused at the stop sign, then turned and disappeared. The deputy tipped his hat once, quietly, before getting back in his cruiser. When the house was still again, I locked the front door, placed the signed receipt in my drawer, and carried the broken table into the garage. 3 weeks passed. I swept the front porch each morning, not because it needed it, but because it gave my hands something to do. The hydrangeas bloomed and faded. The weather turned crisp. No calls, no texts, not from him, not from her. Then one evening near dusk, there was a knock at the door. One single knock. Not rushed, not timid, just final. I opened it slowly. Grant stood there alone. No car in the driveway, no Carly at his side. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt wrinkled. He looked older, less smug, more worn, but not repentant, just tired. "I'm not here to argue," he said. I owe you." He held out an envelope. I took it without a word. $6,000, he said. "It's not all of it, but I'm trying." I didn't ask where the money came from. I didn't ask what had changed or what Carly thought about him being here. I didn't ask anything. I didn't invite him in. Instead, I looked him in the eye the way I used to when he was a teenager, standing in front of a broken window or a failed report card. "Keep going," I said. He gave a small nod, almost like a bow, then turned and walked down the steps. He didn't look back. I stood there until he reached the sidewalk. He walked not toward the corner, but toward the bus stop at the end of the block. He must have come on foot. I waited until he was out of view, then stepped back inside. I set the envelope on the kitchen counter and washed my hands at the sink. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. I opened the drawer beside the fridge and placed the envelope beside the restitution form, where the amount still owed was typed clearly in black ink. Then I pulled out a clean sheet of paper and began subtracting. After I wrote the new total at the bottom, I folded the list neatly in thirds and slipped it into the envelope with the cash. The guest room took 2 days to clear. I moved slowly, Not because I was tired, but because I wanted to do it right. I took down the heavy curtains Carly had hung without asking and folded them into a donation box. I vacuumed the baseboards, wiped the closet shelves, and opened the windows wide to let in fresh air. The mattress was still firm, barely used. I flipped it, laid new sheets, and added a simple quilt. The rocking chair that used to belong to my mother fit nicely in the corner. I placed a small bookshelf under the window and filled it with stories Florence's granddaughter might enjoy. She would visit next week, Florence had said, just for the weekend. Her parents were going out of town, and she loved to draw. I already had crayons and paper waiting in a drawer next to a deck of cards and a half-used coloring book. It was quiet in the house now, not just silent, still. Nothing shifted where it shouldn't. No footsteps in the hall, no unfamiliar voices in the kitchen. Everything was where I left it. I didn't lock the study door anymore. I didn't have to. At night, I sat by the window in the guest room and looked out at the porch light across the street. Florence sometimes waved from her window when she saw me there. I waved back. The shadows in the hallway no longer made me pause. The coat closet no longer held surprises. I'd even replaced the rug Grant had once spilled wine on years ago, a stain I'd covered but never forgotten. There was no knocking at the door, no phone calls, just Mail and Florence's chatter on the weekends, and the sound of birds returning to the feeder outside the kitchen window. The house was no fuller than before, but it felt bigger somehow. Not because of who was in it, but because of who wasn't. Before I went to bed, I moved the envelope from the kitchen drawer to the fireproof safe in my study. Then I turned off the lights and walked down the hallway without looking back. The trees had started to turn, leaves scattered across the lawn each morning in quiet little piles, and the air carried that faint bite that always came before the first frost. I had started keeping a sweater near the front door, one I draped over my shoulders while sweeping the steps or bringing in the mail. One morning, just after sunrise, I opened the door and found a plain white envelope resting on the welcome mat. No name, no stamp, no return address. I knew the handwriting before I opened it. Inside was a single folded note. "I'm not asking to come back. Just thank you for protecting what matters." There was no signature. He didn't have to sign it. I read it twice, then folded it again and brought it inside. I didn't set it on the kitchen counter or pin it to the fridge. I didn't hold it to my chest or read it out loud. I placed it in the bottom drawer of my study desk with the legal papers and the inventory list. Not for nostalgia, for record. The locks had long since been changed. The trust was finalized, every clause notarized and filed. The restitution balance sat at an even number now, with a checkbook log tracking each deposit. There hadn't been any more visits, no more knocks, no calls, and I hadn't expected any, not really. Some mornings, I still woke early and waited. For what? I wasn't sure. But by the time the kettle boiled and the birds gathered near the feeder, that feeling always faded. I carried my tea to the porch, wrapped the sweater tighter around my arms, and sat down facing the yard. The breeze lifted the leaves in slow spirals. Across the street, Florence's lights flicked on. The porch step was solid beneath me, the house behind me, quiet. I brought the cup to my lips and held it steady in both hands. I stayed like that for a long time, just listening, until the street settled back into stillness and the day began.